It's been a great day so far, and I'm delighted to be here with you. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the ideas of where I started with what I hope to happen with Waterfire. But let me first tell you my favorite story, and some of you may have heard this, of something that happened at Waterfire. What we had wanted to do was to build a sense of community engagement for everybody. And part of that was recognizing that for far too many people in our community, art is something that they think doesn't touch their lives. If they thought more about it, they'd realize that art is all around them in the clothing they wear and graphic design and everything. But for them, art was something that didn't seem to be in their lives. And one night at Waterfire, actually it wasn't at Waterfire, it was Thursday afternoon, and we were moving these 500 and 600 pound anchors that we have in the river and cleaning out mud and stuff like that. And a guy in a construction outfit came to me. So he had overalls and steel-toed work boots and a hard hat. He came up to me and said, "Are you involved with Waterfire?" And I said, yeah, we're with Waterfire. And he said, "I love Waterfire." So this was a construction worker, and it really pleased me that he loved Waterfire. And he said, "My whole family loves Waterfire. We were here a week and a half ago or so. We stayed till almost midnight. I was here with my wife, my kids, my mother-in-law's sister, and we were here till almost midnight, and we didn't have one fight." And I said, "Oh, that's great." He said, "No, you don't understand. Wherever we go, we always bring 2 cars because someone's going home early." And then I didn't know what to say, but he kept talking. And he said, "You know, I'm going to say something really strange, and I don't want you to take it wrong or anything, but this Waterfire thing, it's almost like it's art or something." That was, I think, the best compliment we've ever gotten for Waterfire. And I loved all the conditionals. I don't want you to take this wrong. It's going to sound a little strange. This Waterfire thing, I like that noun, it's almost like it's art or something. And so I don't know in his lexicon what art was, but it clearly wasn't something he expected to be encountering with his mother-in-law. But he did recognize that something chemical had happened in that relationship. And what fascinates me is the larger ecosystem of our community and where art is. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I got there and what we were hoping to do with that. And in retrospect, as we look back at our childhood, we see all sorts of influences. And one of my earliest memories was playing in the mud and creating vast cities in the mud and planting little moss and branches and trees, and then diverting the water from the gutter to make rivers that flowed through it. And I have to say, it's a lot easier to control the tide when I was 6 than it is to control the tide in the river just outside the auditorium, where we have to deal with low water and high water and weather and things like that. But you know, that initial sense of trying to make this peaceful garden for a whole city was something I was doing at 6, 7, and 8. My mother always insisted we have candles on the dining room table. And candles, as you know, gutter in the wind, and the wax makes these fantastical forms and stuff like that. And my 2 younger sisters very quickly instituted a rule that whoever played with the candles did all the dishes. I did a lot of dishes. They would immediately, you know, I'd see this amazing thing the wax had done and reach out to adjust it or do something, and my little sisters would say, "See, he's playing with the candles, he's playing with the candles," and sure enough, I was doing all the dishes. But all these things come together, and the next thing we did is in our summers, we used to go camp in the high desert. And we would spend the whole day looking around at the geology and looking for fossils and cleaning up litter. There was always a tradition of public service in our family, and gathering little bits of trash that people had left. And whatever we could find in the desert, at sunset, we would light a small, couldn't even call it a bonfire, a very small fire of the litter we'd cleaned up. And we would sit around that fire made of detritus and whatever we could find, typically old ammo boxes and things like that. And we would sit suddenly as a family in the middle of this completely blank landscape and light the fire and see each other lit by firelight and talk and tell stories and sing songs. And our small fuel supply would run out, and you'd suddenly be sitting there in the dark, and you'd be enveloped by the whole arch of the stars overhead. And that was this most intense sense of community and family I could remember. And to a large extent, I've wanted to build that at city scale. So from playing in the mud to playing with the candles, it's all connected. If we go much further back and think about why we seek the art, why we seek art, why we make art, why it's important to us, and I'd be going all the way back, not to primitive man, but that's interesting too, but we've only got 18 minutes. But if we go to Athens, the sense of public good, moral good, civic good, beauty, and truth were all seen as sort of one general concept. And I think this is why art is so powerful to us. It really, it informed the Athenian culture in every respect, and it was all of a whole. And I had wanted to see if we could do that. And what really crystallized this for me, my training, I came to Providence to go to Brown and studied ecology. So I was interested in the way organisms interact with their environment. And I was also an artist, and I had an exhibition in Soho, which, believe it or not, used to be an arts district. And I had a gallery, and I went down to my gallery. It wasn't for my show. And I encountered a newly minted art punk at the door. And he was the employee of the gallery, everybody welcoming them in theory. But he wasn't welcoming them in. He was making everyone who came in off the street feel uncomfortable and that they didn't belong and they weren't hip enough for this show. And I just sort of watched his behavior. The exhibition was of a friend of mine's who was doing street photography all about the culture that happens on the street. And it was just amazing to suddenly see this public perception that art should be free and for everyone, and the work being about egalitarianism. And there was this, you know, young kid, guy, the blue mohawk, sitting there, making everyone feel totally uncomfortable to come into the space. And that same weekend, in different shows around New York, I kept suddenly seeing a field that I thought was always open and full of egalitarianism had so many levels of almost unnavigable elitism. Later that day, I was at an art opening, and I loved this woman's paintings. I didn't know her from Adam. I'd just seen it. I was excited about it. I talked to someone who I didn't know, and I said, I love these paintings. And I was just had ice thrown in my face where she said, oh, she hasn't painted in this style in months. So suddenly I was insufficiently up on this particular artist, and a division was made that I didn't know that she was in her blue period now. And there was no need for that in the art. And then later in another opening, I had just talked to the artist about what her work meant, and then a little while later I ran into a critic who told me what it meant, which was totally different. And then I ran into the curator of the show who had a totally different theory about it. And then there was the gallerist who was talking about how it was related to this. They all had their entire different worlds, but they were all absolutely adamant that theirs was the only right one. And I came back from that weekend vowing to try to create a work of art that would be absolutely public in every sense you can imagine. In a public space, presented for free, made with volunteers in public, with a symbology and a sort of, well, just a symbolic structure that would be entirely open to everyone and to interpret and open, but it would also deal with very clear, long-standing symbolisms of fire and water as symbols of life and death and accomplishment and creativity. And to treat the city and the audience as part of the canvas, as part of the work of art itself, as an experiment. I also wanted it to have no irony and no secret meanings, and see if one could do that as an experiment. And we first did it in 1994, and you've seen that there's been a tremendous demand to see this. I don't think it's so much about the artwork. I think the demand to see it is that we don't have things like this in our life. We don't have things that bring, I mean, there are sports games, but sport games is still some segment. We don't have things that bring the entire community, the people who like the art and who don't like the art, or who for art is capital A or small a, or they don't even know that it's art. We don't have things that bring every ethnicity together, every language together, every background, every class, and we need that. That is what makes us a community. And that's just a very, very important thing for all of us to do. The other thing I encountered when I came to Providence was this astounding sense of self-negative image for the city of Providence. I came here astounded at the bones of the city, the ethnicity, the food, the architecture, And everyone I knew who had grown up here was very, very negative about it. And that's something that one really has to take hold of. I mean, the first foundation of what we need to do to be a community is to recognize ourselves as a community, to reach out and engage everyone as part of that community and make this a sustainable place. It's sort of the first foundation. Before you can make the schools better, before you can make healthcare better, before you can make even the roads better, we've all got to feel there's a future for all of us in this community and that we're all in it together. So one of the functions of Waterfire was to try to bind together the community as a whole and have them a sense of self-identity and also this redemptive sort of phoenix-like quality of rising from the ashes, that it's possible to change things. And I do see art making as an example of creative problem solving. I can remember in that desert one day, because when I went to all the permitting agencies for Waterfire, they very quickly told me that it's completely illegal to build a fire in the middle of a river. And I said, really? Can you show me the ordinance? And of course, there's not an ordinance that says that because no one was stupid enough to try it before. But, and so I said, and he said, well, of course there's not an ordinance that says that, but it's just illegal. And I said, well, if there isn't a law that says it's illegal, why don't we just turn that around and then maybe it's legal? He said, no. So I said, well, why don't you give me all the laws relevant to this, and we'll just meet the letter of the law for, we want to protect the water, we want to protect the air, we want it to be safe. And we went through all the different permits. I couldn't get any permitting agency to give us permission, not one of them. But what I was able to get them to do was every single one of them said, well, we won't voice an objection if that agency approves it. And I managed to link the loop all the way around so they were pointing at each other. And I said, hey, none of you have any objections, right? And so that's how we got the permit. So I sort of see this as creative problem solving, and that's what artists do. We come to situations and think of new ways to do things. And going back to age 7 or 8, I was doing that as well. I remember in this same desert, in Utah and Arizona, there's this beautiful national park on Navajo land called the Mittens, with these huge towering rock formations. And they look much closer to you than they are because the air is so crystal clear in the desert. And we were camping there, and I was there with my 2 cousins and my 2 sisters who always get me in trouble. And we were told, you have to stay within sight of the car. Other than that, we could deal with the scorpions and the rattlesnakes and the lack of water on the rocks, but if we were in sight of the car, we were cool. So I and my 2 younger cousins, my sisters notably did not participate, realized that if one of us was posted on the hill and stared at the car the whole time, the rest of the party could go down the valley, through the creek, under the underbrush, and up to the next hill where they could see the car, signal back, and then the last party could go through. Well, we daisy-chained our way that way, never leaving sight of the car, 3 miles across the open desert to the Mittens. Shortly after we left camp, we were noticed, but no one had any idea where we were. And then we came back, and then we discovered that the sand rock was really dangerous and it fell on you when there were landslides, so we decided maybe, keeping an eye on the car, we'd go all the way back. So we went all the way back and caught holy hell when we arrived. Fortunately, it was my younger cousin's birthday, so when she blew out her birthday candles that night, she took us off permanent suspension for any activities. That was her birthday wish, for which I've always been grateful. I can't see the time. Okay, good. So that's an example of creative problem solving. All artists do this. Umberto's done this with AS220. Every artist has done this. And it's at the essence of what art making is. It's trying to make the community and the world a better place and being determined to do that. And when this avenue doesn't work, you try to find another way to do it. And I think that's just such an important thing to do. The symbolism of water and fire is significant. They're both symbols of life, water and fire. You know, obviously, those are obvious symbols. They're also both symbols of death. So fire is a symbol of loss, of destruction, of fire, of hell. And water is a symbol of the subconscious and death in many cultures. You cross the river Styx, you go down in the beast underwater on the trip to Nineveh. All of these are symbols of death. And yet, they're equally self-destructive. so that water will put a fire out, but just as surely fire will boil water away to nothing. So right at the heart of this art piece were two symbolic allegorical statements. One of them is that life is a balance between creation and destruction, between life and death, between active and passive, between reflective and creative. And I think that's a very significant sort of space to base any artwork around. And many, many people can't describe Waterfire. They can't explain why it touches them so deeply. But some of these symbolic structures people are sensitive to. The other part of Waterfire, as I mentioned, we did it in a public in every way. And one of those is by inviting the public to come be volunteers in the midst of the mix, not tearing tickets or sweeping up the floors, but actually on central stage, doing all the many things we do and inviting other artists to do things. And so what those volunteers do is they're members of the community. They come out of the dark after the fires have started to dwindle and got dim, they're low embers. And suddenly you see a community of volunteers who don't necessarily know each other, representing people from throughout your community, who come forth out of the dark, and each of them, by their individual action, placed their own log on the fire and built it back to fire, to light, to warmth, to activity. And that's how we build a community. That's how we build a life. That's how we write a novel. That's how we raise a family. All of us coming together. And so that's the other allegorical statement that's constantly be reenacting, is that by working together and each doing their own small part, we can illuminate a city and illuminate the world. So that's the essence of Waterfire. The other aspect of it is this sense of rejuvenation and possibility and freedom and experiment you can do. And I want to close with a short stanza of a poem that Robert Rono sent to us. He's a poet in Manhattan. It was published about 5 years ago. But all of us want this sense of repose where we feel we have a place in the world where we can exist and our action can have a change in the world. We want to experience being alive and still enjoy all those senses. So the things that make Waterfire so intriguing are its beauty, its light, its sense of community and connectedness, it's pre-verbal, it's non-linguistic, it's got ritual, sort of the synchronicity of running into the crowd, this complete sense of freedom and immersion and simplicity, and its multisensory structure. But this is what Robert wrote. This is the end of a longer poem. I was in Providence for a conference, a town I had thought insignificant, not a city to be considered a city in flight. But that night they lit 100 bonfires in the river, running up through the streets, and the face of every girl and woman with her lover by firelight was truly beautiful. Had this city been nuked by a terrorist or rogue nation, I would not have minded dying there with them that night. It is possible to be several billion strong and every homeless man with a singing voice belong. Thank you.